प्रभु तव मूर्ति विनोदकारी पलपन विसरे नहीं जो विसारी जुगल चरण सोल चिन्ह जेह नजर समीपे रहो हमारी एह नजर समीपे रहो हमारी एह घनश्याम महाराज ની જય, હરે કૃષ્ણ મહારાજ ની જય, સ્વામિનારાયણ ભગવાન ની જય. Supreme Almighty, our beloved Ghanshyamprakashdasji Maharaj, the path maker to our liberation, our utmost dear Puja Guruji, Puja Santo, and all we bhaktos, Jai Swaminarayan. Today is our Yuva Course 3 English, and it is based off of Gadara 1st chapter 35, Sadguru Shri Gunatitanand Swami Vato, and the Charitra of Kushal Kurabai. Now, in the past two lectures, we discussed regarding the same basis but different content. And in this lecture, we're also going to continue with Bhagwan Swaminarayan's Divine Vachanamrut, Safeguarding One's Liberation. Safeguarding one's liberation. So let's start with the introduction. On Boshvati 12th, Samvat 1876, the American calendar date is January 12th, 1820. Swami Shri Sajanji Maharaj was sitting facing east on a large decorated cot under the neem tree in front of the Mandir of Sri Vasudeva Narayan in Dada Kachar's Darbar in Gadara. He is dressed entirely in white clothes. At that time, an assembly of munis as well as devotees from various places had gathered before him. The scene is set under the neem tree, which is very, very famous. And currently at that time, approximately 30 or 40 years ago, that tree died, but it is considered to be a mukt of God because it was in the service of God in the form of shade. And when Bhagwan Swaminarayan was there at that time in Gadara, Bhagwan Swaminarayan used to sit underneath it. Nan Santo used to sit underneath it. About 30-40 years ago, it fell down, but another tree in that place grew, and it's still there in that very place. So that place is very holy. And Bhagwan Swaminarayan was seated underneath this tree, in front of the Mandir of Sri Vasudeva Narayan Dada Kachar's Darbar. And as usual, Bhagwan Swaminarayan was wearing his white clothes, very, very authentic, very, very elegant yet simple. And at that time, munis, meaning santos and devotees, had gathered before him. Now moving on, addressing the munis, Shriji Maharaj said, "Either you ask me a question or I shall ask you a question." Thereupon the munis said, "Maharaj, please ask." So, saying so, Shriji Maharaj then said, "Suppose there's a person who, despite having little intelligence, does not falter when it comes to safeguarding his own liberation. On the other hand, there is another person who is very intelligent, so much so that he can point out mistakes even in great men, but he does not walk on the path of liberation. What is the reason for this?" Now, saying this, there's two different types of scenarios, two different types of people that Bhagwan Swaminarayan is talking about. He's saying, despite having little intelligence, does not falter when it comes to safeguarding one's own liberation. Now, little intelligence. First and foremost, intelligence in the world is considered to be a person who has a good GPA if you're in high school or in college. Nonetheless, a person who knows a lot of you can say, information from the scriptures, or is very, very technical, or very, very smart in chemistry, physics, so on and so forth. Now, that intelligence can be applied in many different ways, in many, many different fields, in many, many different subjects. But in reality, what is Bhagwan Swaminarayan's perspective? What does he want us to be like? How does he want the human body or the human mind to be intelligent? In what way? That is what Bhagwan Swaminarayan is reflecting in this Vachanamrita Kadara, first chapter 35. So, Bhagwan is saying, despite having little intelligence, he does not falter when it comes to safeguarding his own liberation. Now, that word is the very title of this whole, you can say that phrase is the very title of this Vachanamrita, safeguarding one's liberation. Now, what does that mean? Now, if we look in the context of the world, safeguarding something or keeping it in a very, very close proximity, keeping a watch on it. Now, for example, just how a bird, a mother bird, safeguards its eggs, just like how a mother safeguards her child, just like how elders safeguard their children and other people underneath them. In the same way, safeguarding one's own liberation, what does that mean? That's the very question of this Vachanamrita. And to state in a very simple fashion, safeguarding one's liberation is looking after one's kalyan, looking after one's moksha, looking after that one does not become attached or falter to any other things and only attach oneself to Bhagwan and his ekantik Satpurush. Liberation, well, this soul has been traveling in numerous different bodies for countless lives, yet it has not reached Bhagwan's Akshardham. It has become every single animal species, according to the Vachanamrita, 8.4 million types of species of animals. It has become each and everything. Nonetheless, it still has not reached Bhagwan's divine abode, Akshardham. It has become the mother, the father, the sister, the brother, the uncle, the aunt, so on and so forth, of every soul possible in every combination possible, yet it still has not attained Akshardham. Now, Bhagwan Swaminarayan, he's a very straightforward God who is talking about becoming ekantik and going to Akshardham, liberating and completely becoming free of all kinds of attachments, bonds, and everything like that, and becoming free of all worldly desires. Saying that, Bhagwan Swaminarayan is saying, despite having little intelligence, does not falter when it comes to safeguarding his own liberation. On the other hand, there is another person who is very intelligent. Now, Bhagwan gives a second example. So much so that he can point out mistakes even in great men. But he does not walk on the path of liberation. What is the reason? Now, in the world, there are many, many different CEOs of Fortune 500 companies that make billions of dollars in transfer funds in the billions of dollars. And even the CEO makes millions of dollars in a month. Yet, he even has the intelligence to run 500, 1,000, 2,000, 50,000, 100,000 employees all at once. Yet, his intelligence is of what use? That intelligence on the path of liberation is of what use? That's what Bhagwan Swaminarayan is pointing out. Now, there's a person who's very intelligent, so much so that he points out mistakes in great men. Now, is that really true intelligence, that one is able to point out mistakes in great men? Great men in this form Bhagwan Swaminarayan is talking about is it can be a great sadhu in society. It can be a person who has many, many degrees and is very educated. It can be a king. It can be any kind of person who has a high status in the world. And in the world, people consider that person to be great. That's what Bhagwan Swaminarayan is talking about. And such a person has the ability to point out mistakes, but he does not walk on the path of liberation. Meaning, he's not looking out for his liberation that Bhagwan Swaminarayan had stated in the Shiksha-patra that one should not eat onion and garlic. He doesn't care for that. Or Bhagwan Swaminarayan has established 5 vows for a devotee: not to steal, not to eat meat, not to drink alcohol, etc., so on and so forth. That person does not really mind or care about such kinds of vows. What is the reason that that person, even being so intelligent, is still pointing out bad or negative thoughts regarding great men in society? That's the question at hand. The Munis attempted to answer, but as Shriji Maharaj raised doubts, they were unable to do so satisfactorily. Shriji Maharaj then said, so Munis did not attempt to answer, so Bhagwan Swaminarayan is now saying. Then Shriji Maharaj said, here allow me to answer. Such a person may highly be intelligent, but his intellect is polluted. Now think about it. Let's give an example of a 500-liter gallon of water. 500 liters of water, and you're in a desert, and that water is for you to use, but it's polluted in such a way that bacteria and different infectious diseases are inside of that water. Meaning, if you drink that water, there are highly likely chances that you will get some kind of disease and maybe even pass away in the desert. Now that 500-liter water gallon tank is with you. You're in the middle of the desert, and the best thing to have is water in the desert, not food. But if that tank has infectious diseases and organisms that, if they go inside of you, can paralyze you, can cause much damage to your vital organs, is that of use? In the same way, even if one is highly intelligent, that's 500 liters of water in the desert. But if one's intellect is polluted in the form of infectious diseases and organisms, then will that water do one good? That's the question in this type of metaphor. As a result, Bhagwan continues, he is unable to walk on the path of liberation. For example, suppose there is some tasty buffalo milk. Now Bhagwan Swaminarayan gives his example. And if I can add, throughout the Vachanamrut, Bhagwan Swaminarayan uses the most perfect examples to fit his principles, yet the simplest examples. A worm and a bee, a kite, an iron ball and an iron nail, a buffalo, lemons, rice, flies, honey, so on and so forth. Bhagwan Swaminarayan uses even the simplest environment and turns it into the most, you can say, capturing of examples, and gives it to one's listener. That very, you can say, ability to do that can only be done by Bhagwan, and the one who also has Bhagwan inside of him. Only these two, you can say, elements are able to do such kinds of, you can say, talks. No one can even replicate these kinds of talks that have been done in the Vachanamrut. No one could, can, and will be able to, because these words are the words of Bhagwan Swaminarayan, the Supreme Lord of Lord himself. So Bhagwan Swaminarayan gives a practical example. He says, for example, suppose there's some tasty buffalo milk, meaning let's just say milk, okay? Which in which sakar, meaning sugar, has been added and dissolved. Meaning there's a glass of milk, there's sugar added and dissolved into it. Now if a snake's venom were to fall into it, then that same milk and sugar would become poisonous. Thereafter, whoever drinks it would die. Similarly, such a person may be highly intelligent, but he has perceived a flaw in the great Sant or God. This drawback, in the form of perceiving a flaw, has entered his mind and is comparable to the snake's venom. Now, Bhagwan Swaminarayan's example is very, very simple to understand, and you probably all picked it up. A glass of milk with sugar inside, all dissolved, but one drop of snake venom is inside, making the glass of milk poisonous. In the same way, that venom is in the form of that person's intellect to be polluted. So even if one is very, very intelligent in the form of sugar milk, it doesn't matter, because that one drop of poison or venom kind of completely destroys the feature or element of having the happiness of drinking that one glass of milk. In the same way, what is the reason for this? Bhagwan Swaminarayan says that such a person has perceived a flaw in a great Sant or God. The worst thing to do, in Sadguru Gunatitanand Swami Vatam, Swami says that what is the best of the best and what is the worst of the worst. He asks a question to his bhaktos who are sitting in the assembly in front of him in Junagadh. He asks, what is the best of the best and what is the worst of the worst? Obviously, no one could answer in the assembly, so Swami says himself, the best of the best is to perceive this God, this Sant, meaning Santo, and these Bhakto to be divine. Divine meaning here having a human body with 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, one nose, everything. Yet, they look like us, they do the same kinds of actions, they walk, they talk, they sleep, they do everything. Yet, they are divine. In the same way, on the other hand, we examining each action of the Sant and we taking a flaw of that Sant, that is the worst of the worst. The best of the best is to perceive God and his Satpurush and his Santo and Bhakto to be divine. And the worst of the worst is to develop some kind of flaw in them or perceive a flaw in them and completely detach our mind from their mind or heart. That is the worst of the worst. And in this fashion, Sri Maharaj says that a person's intellect is polluted because of this very feature of perceiving a flaw in the great Sant or God. This drawback in the form of perceiving a flaw has entered his mind and is comparable to the snake's venom. So how can he possibly walk on the path of liberation? There is no doubt. In fact, even if someone were to listen to his talks, those listeners' mind would also fall back from satsang. Moreover, whenever a person possessing such a polluted intellect takes birth, he always maligns God or his Sant or his devotees. Conversely, a person whose intellect is not polluted in this manner, even if he's a little intelligent, he does not falter in safeguarding his own liberation. Now, Bhagwan gives the 2 scenarios and depicts the whole scene in front of us that, in satsang there's a person that does this, takes flaws due to his polluted intellect, and he does this ever since he takes birth. On the other hand, there is a person who has an intellect whose mind is not polluted, and he safeguards his own liberation. So Bhagwan completely puts everything on the table and explains what the reason is for this very action. Thereupon, Muktanand Swami asked, Maharaj, can one with such a polluted intellect ever turn towards God? Sadguru Shri Muktanand Swami, Satsang ni Ma, our Adi Guru, according to our parampara, he asks a question which is so kind of him, because his sole intention is for each and every soul to reach Bhagwan, any way, so how. That is his very, very sole intention. Yet, he asks a question so that each and every mumukshu in the future can benefit and can see his mother-like nature. He asks, Maharaj, please tell us how we can avoid developing such a demonic intellect. How can we avoid it? So how can we stay close to you? How can we safeguard our liberation? How can we make it our last life? How can we become beyond Maya? How can we become ekantik with dharma, bhakti, jnana, vairagya? How can we become Brahmrup? All these different statements are compiled into Swami's one question. That Swami says that, please tell us how we can avoid developing such an intellect, a demonic intellect. Shree Maharaj explained, if a person does not keep the following four swabhavas, meaning natures, with God or his sant, then his intellect will never become demonic. What are the four swabhavas? So, Bhagwan Swaminarayan says there are four natures that are somehow, some way polluting our intellect, our mindset. If we avoid them, if we completely avoid them on the path of liberation, then we would definitely be able to keep our intellect pure. If a person does not keep the following four swabhavas with God or his sant, then his intellect would never become demonic. First, anger. Second, arrogance, meaning ego. Third, jealousy. And fourth, deceit, meaning dishonesty. Now, these four natures are great, great mountains. Mountains that can destroy many, many things. Mountains that can pretty much remove us from the path of liberation, remove us from the sight of the Ekantik Satpurush, and completely throw us off this path. Anger, ego, jealousy, and dishonesty. Now, each one, there can be a katha done, but one can straightforwardly understand that these four are very, very bad. They are very, very cruel. They are our enemies. They are trying to kill us. They are trying to remove us. They are Maya soldiers. They are not our soldiers in the form of dharma, bhakti, jnana, vairagya. So our responsibility is to avoid them as best as possible. And the very way to do that is to perform Sant Samagam. The more we associate with the Ekantik Satpurush, who is God enlightened, who has contact with Bhagwan Swaminarayan himself, he is the one who can teach us to avoid these four. He is the one who can first teach us how we can recognize these people who are these enemies who are hiding within our territories in locations that we cannot even imagine and attacking us from all different kinds of angles. These are our true enemies. These are the enemies that are keeping us away from God, not anyone outside. not anyone who is externally we are perceiving, but these people, these enemies are the ones who are keeping us away on the path of God and from the Ekantik Satpurusha's heart. And the very way to remove them is by performing Sant Samagam. It is not by trying to make a personal effort. That comes second. It is not by doing 500 maras or 500 danvats. It is not by doing many dharna parna and chandrayans and vrats and taps. It cannot be done like that. Bhagwan Swaminarayan's best method, best way to kill cancer in the form of chemotherapy is Sant Samagam. Brahmanand Swami says, Santa Samagam kije nishadina Santa Samagam kije. Santa Samagam kije nishadina. Day and night perform Sant Samagam. Day and night perform Sant Samagam. Because that is the only way to liberate one's soul from this Maya, from this world, from this universe, from this Prakruti. And it is the only way to attach it to Parabrahm, Purushottam Narayan, Supreme Godhead Himself. There is no other method. And in the scriptures, according to Gadada Middle Chapter 59, according to Gadada Middle Chapter 54, according to Gadada First Chapter 54 and Gadada First Chapter 58, Sarangpur 7th, Sarangpur 10th, without the Ekantik Satpurush, it's not possible. Without the hand of the Ekantik Satpurush, one cannot reach Akshardham. It's just not possible. There is no other way. No matter how much one may try, no matter how much one of a level one may attain a spiritual level in meditation or anything, it's still not possible to reach Akshardham without the Ekantik Satpurush's Sang. Without folding our hands in front of the Ekantik Satpurush, without becoming his das, without doing what he says, it's just not possible. That's why, to avoid these four enemies, we must associate with the Ekantik Satpurush, and we are very fortunate. We are very fortunate that in this population of 8.3 billion people in this world, we have received an Ekantik Satpurush who we can share our heart with, who we can take the saharo, the asro, the refuge of, and by taking his refuge, we can attain Akshardham. So we are very fortunate. If, however, he keeps even one of these four, meaning these four enemies, then his intellect would become demonic. Just like Jay and Vijay. Despite being wise, their intellect became demonic because they were arrogant towards the Sankadik. Consequently, both fell from Vaikunt. Now this is a charitra, but they fell from Vaikunt Dham, which is a dham, which is an abode, because they had arrogance with the Sankadiks. Now, having either any of these four, Bhagwan did not say that all four, or one of, or 2 out of 4, or 3 out of 4. Bhagwan said 1 out of 4 will do. 1 out of 4 will kill you on the path of liberation and will take you apart from Bhagwan and his Ekantik Satpurush. That's how dangerous these enemies are. That's how cruel these enemies are. That's how strong Maya is. But there's nothing to be afraid of. Because we have the element who has created Maya in the form of Bhagwan Swaminarayan. We have the element who is beyond Maya in the form of our Ekantik Satpurush. We have the Santos and Bhaktos who are always holding our hands and giving us support to fight these enemies. So they are strong. They are very strong. But they are not stronger than Bhagwan and his Ekantik Satpurush and his Santo and Bhakto. Because Bhagwan, his Ekantik Satpurush, Santo and Bhakto are divine. They have a divine form. They are beyond Maya. They are great. Compared to them, Maya is nothing. Maya is like an ant. That's how great they are. That's why by holding their hands, that's why by attaching to them, that's why by understanding their intentions and becoming honest with them, according to Gadada 1st chapter 58th Vachnamrut, one can also clear Maya and float above Maya. Or else in this world we can see outside people are doing hideous things. People are doing vulgar things. Who is able to even think what is Maya and what is not? Who is able to take apart what Maya is, what the world is, what their self, the Atma is, and who God is? It's not possible. The world cannot even fathom. People outside cannot even understand what Bhagwan Swaminarayan's whole intention is, or what is right and what is wrong. But the devotee of Bhagwan Swaminarayan has the ability, by the grace of Bhagwan Swaminarayan as an Ekantik Satpurush, to think and decipher what is right and what is wrong. They have the ability to understand and dissect what I should do and what I cannot do. They have the ability to dissect that I have this nature in me, this nature in me. So if I perform Sant Samagam, I would be able to remove it. They have this kind of intelligence. They want to give up these natures. Whoever is in the level of a mumukshu or spiritual aspirant who is treading on the path of liberation, who is still not in the level of a mukt or an enlightened soul, but is going towards that path, or on that path, going in that direction, reaching that goal one day. So, saying that, Bhagwan gives an example, but this example is just for us to become vigilant and very aware that these enemies are very, very cruel. But we have Bhagwan is Ekantik Satpurush, Santo and Bhakto who are strong. Furthermore, when a person's intellect becomes demonic, even the virtues of God and his devotees appear as faults to them. Wherever such a person takes birth, he either becomes an attendant of Shiv or the king of some demons and worships God through animosity. This ends the Vachnamrita Gadada 1st chapter 35. Now such a person, what happens is, if you have a big, great white wall which is 100 feet long and 100 feet high, and there's just one dot, maybe approximately in size 1 or 2 inches, even from a distance where you can see the whole 100 by 100 wall, you'd be able to see that black dot. What is a demonic intellect like? That person perceiving the black dot instead of the 100 by 100 white wall. The 100 by 100 white wall is so enormous, is so great, is so white and pure. But due to that person's demonic intellect, he's only able to see that 2-inch black dot. That's what Bhagwan Swaminarayan is talking about, that when a person's intellect becomes demonic, even the virtues of God and his devotees appear to be faults to him. That person may be kind, that person may be a gentle nature, that person may have a lot of mema for Santo Bhakto, that person maybe has a bhakti, dharma, gnan, vairagya, that person has attachment for the Ekantik Satpurush, for God, Santo Bhakto, everyone. All these different good qualities, some way, somehow, that person who has a polluted intellect would see negativity, or find negativity, or turn that positivity into negativity. That is how potent this demonic intellect is. And Bhagwan even shows a consequence, that such a person becomes the kings of demons and worships God through animosity, which is no form of worshipping God. and no point of worshipping God. So this ends the Vachanamrita Gadada, first chapter 35. Let us pray to Maharaj in his Ekantik Satpurush and Santo and Bhakto that we never develop such kind of a demonic intellect and we stay on the path of God to attain ultimate liberation. Because again, we've taken many, many lives, yet we still have not attained Bhagwan. Now there has to be some kind of, you could say, burning that's going on inside, that when am I going to become released from this cycle of life and death? When am I going to become a mukta of Bhagwan? When am I going to attain Bhagwan? When am I going to attain the Rajipo of Bhagwan is Ekantik Satpurush, Santo and Bhakto? That burning desire, that burning sensation is the very fuel of that mumukshu, that spiritual aspirant, that inspires that spiritual aspirant to go further and further on the path of liberation, to further follow niyams and dharmas, to further have vairagya, bhakti, gnan, dharma, to further attach oneself to the Ekantik Satpurush, to further become honest with the Ekantik Satpurush. Such kinds of spiritual endeavors that mumukshu is able to trigger into one's life due to this burning desire of making one's life the last in attaining Akshardham. That is the end goal, to say. Now moving on to Sadguru Shri Gunatitanand Swami Vato. The one who has Gnan of God and his sadhu has nothing else to accomplish. Even if he, meaning his body, is here, meaning on earth, he is seated in Akshardham. Therefore, do not worry if one spins more or less mara. One should act according to one's capacity, but keep God and his sadhu in one's heart, meaning Atma, soul. And our greatness is not from performing endeavors, but it is from the strength of keeping God's upasana. Sadguru Shri Gunatitanand Swami's Vato are like atom bombs. Each and every Vat is so powerful, is so jam-packed with spiritual intensity that one can perform Katha for a long, long time and get many, many different kinds of viewpoints and signals and red lights in one's life to implement so that one can become free from this Maya. Swami says that the one who has Gnan of God and his sadhu, meaning Ekantik Satpurush, has nothing else to accomplish. Even if he is here, he is seated in Akshardham. Gnan of God and his sadhu. What does that mean? What is Gnan, meaning knowledge? But wisdom. Knowledge in the form of wisdom of God and his sadhu, Ekantik Satpurush. Well, in this Sadguru, in this very vat of Sadguru Shri Gunatitanand Swami, meaning his book, there's another vat that he says to understand sadhu is like what? To understand him to be all-knowing Sarvagna is to understand God, and whoever does that, one foot is here and the other one is in Akshardham. That is to understand Bhagwan, or that is to understand the Ekantik Satpurush. That is the knowledge of the Ekantik Satpurush. So, to understand Bhagwan's Ekantik Satpurush to be all-knowing, to understand Bhagwan to be all-knowing, to understand Bhagwan to be everywhere, to understand that the Ekantik Satpurush, his sole intention is for each and every soul to attain Akshardham. Each and every soul, his whole goal is to have each soul attain Akshardham, to know that his swarup, his form is nirdos, to have faith in him. All these types of different viewpoints are of Gnan. And whoever instills that kind of Gnan or knowledge or wisdom inside of one's soul, not in the antakaran, meaning the mind, or not off of reading, but inside of one's soul, has nothing else to accomplish. It's done. There's many, many types of accomplishments in the world, but this kind of accomplishment helps one enable to go to Akshardham. Even if his body is here, Swami says he is seated in Akshardham. That's how important this all-in-one key of having the knowledge of God and his Ekantik Satpurush is. Therefore, do not worry if one spends more or less mara, meaning if one does 500 maras a day or if one can do 5 maras a day. That's all according to one's capacity. That's nothing to worry about, Swami says. But keep God and his sadhu in one's heart. That is very important. To keep Bhagwan and his Ekantik Satpurush in our heart, to witness them, to look at them, to perceive them, to be with us, to have them with us in each and every action is something that is definitely a necessary in the path of liberation. And our greatness is not from performing spiritual endeavors, meaning mara, danvats, vrat, tap, austerities. No, but it is from the strength of keeping God's upasana. God's upasana meaning the worship of God, keeping God with you, keeping very, very close contact with God by remembering him, by staying in his 9 types of bhakti in some way, somehow, some form is a form of upasana, by developing very, very, you can say, close affection, deep affection for God is in the form of upasana. And Bhagwan and Swami says that keep the strength of this. Do not keep the strength of, oh, I've performed 1,000 maras a day, so, I'm going to reach Akshardham. Or I perform 1,000 danvats, or I perform pradakshina for 5 hours a day, so I'm going to reach Akshardham. No. Nothing like that. But how much affection have I developed for Bhagwan? That's the main thing. That is the power. Keeping a close contact with God. That is the very strength that one should keep. So this is Sadguru Shri Gunatitan Swami Vato, Prakaran 1, Vat 221. A charitra is of Kushal Kaurabai, which you all can read from the PDF. If one does not receive the PDF, one can email us at loyadhamnj@gmail.com. So this is our course, lecture 3, and Yuva course, and we will continue in the near future off of such kind of Vachanamruts and Swamini Vato and Charitras. Saying this, my humble Jai Swaminarayan.
घनश्याम महाराजनी जय। पोटे प्रभु सकल मुनि केशम। स्वामी नारायण दिव्य मूर्ति, स्वामी नारायण दिव्य। संतन के विश्राम, हरे प्रभु संतन के विश्राम। पोढ़े प्रभु सकल मुनि के श्याम। अक्षर पर आनंद घन प्रभु कियो है भू पर ठाम। जेहि मिलत जन तरत माया, जेहि मिलत जन तरत माया। लहत अक्षर धाम, हारे प्रभु लहत अक्षर धाम। पोढ़े प्रभु सकड़ मुनि के श्याम। शारद शेष महेश महामुनि जपत जेहि गुण नाम। जास पदरज शीश धरि धरि, जास पदरज शीश धरि धरि। होवत जन निष्काम, हरे प्रभु होवत जन निष्काम। पोढ़े प्रभु सकड़ मुनि के श्याम। प्रेम के परयंक पर प्रभु करत सुख आराम। मुक्तानंद निज चरण डिग गुण, मुक्तानंद निज गुण गावत आठो जाम। हरे गुण गावत आठो जाम। પોઢે પ્રભુ સકલ મુનિકેશામ સ્વામિનારાયણ દિવ્ય મૂર્તિ સ્વામિનારાયણ દિવ્ય મૂર્તિ સંતન કે વિશ્રામ હારે પ્રભુ સંતન કે વિશ્રામ પોઢે પ્રભુ સકળ મુનિકેશામ પોઢો પોઢો સજાનંદ સ્વામી અખિયામાં નિંદરા ભરાણી રે પોઢો પોઢો સજાનંદ સ્વામી હારે તમે માથેથી પાગ ઉતારો રે પછી ફૂલડાની ટોપી ધારો રે સજાનંદ સ્વામી હારે તમે જર કસી જામાં ઉતારો રે પછી હીર કોરી ધોતી ધારો રે પોઢો પોઢો સજાનંદ સ્વામી હારે તમે કેળનો પટકો છોડો રે પછી ફૂલની પછેડી ઓઢો રે પોઢો પોઢો સજાનંદ સ્વામી હારે પોઢ્યા પ્રેમાનંદના સ્વામી રે સખી જોઈ જોઈ આનંદ પામી રે પોઢો પોઢો સજાનંદ સ્વામી અખિયામાં નિંદરા ભરાની રે પોઢો પોઢો નંદ સ્વામી શ્રી ઘનશ્યામ મહારાજની જય હરિકૃષ્ણ મહારાજની જય શ્રી સ્વામિનારાયણ ભગવાનની જય